So your town closed your child's school due to COVID-19. Now you're stuck at home with your child and your teacher's throwing assignments at you, your speech language pathologist is throwing assignments at you, and you just have no idea what's happening. Your child's behavior is out of control and you don't know how to help them get anything accomplished for school. Does this sound like you? Well, I'm about to share 6 tips with you on how to improve your child's communication at home and help them complete assignments from the teacher and from the speech language pathologist. So stay tuned. Over the past couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of complaints about your child not being able to do some of the activities that were assigned to him or her at home. And I want you to keep in mind that this is a very difficult transition, not only for you, but also for your child. Kids on the autism spectrum have a really hard time with transitions and with change. They're really rigid and they're really schedule oriented. So when you mess up their schedule, their behaviors tend to increase. So what I'm going to do now is give you some tips in order to help you regulate your child's behavior at home and emotions and gain compliance so that you can get some of the activities that were assigned by your teacher, your speech language pathologist, or someone else, so you can get those things accomplished. Usually when I start out my sessions, the first thing I do is establish what the student is going to work for. I usually have a bin of toys that the child gets to pick from, and they're highly motivating toys that the student doesn't otherwise get during the day. Now you can use whatever you want. You can use an iPad, you can use a TV, you can use music, food, whatever toys you have available. But if you really want the student to be successful and if you want it to really work, I suggest using something that they don't normally get on a regular basis, and that will make the child more motivated to do the activity. So I start by saying, what do you want to work for? And then I let the child choose and say, I want whatever it is. And then what I do is I either put the item on a token board or I'll put a picture of the item on a token board. So this is what a token board looks like. So basically you can either put a picture here or you can just write it out on a piece of paper, first speech, then whatever they're working for. So say bubbles. So here's an example of a token board that you can just draw out. I'm not the best drawer in the world, so sorry, but those are supposed to be lips and a little chatter box here, a little communication box. So if you're doing speech, for example, you say first speech, then puzzle, and you can even put part of the item right on the board so it's more tangible for the student, especially for students who can't read. They might not understand this concept. And then as they comply with what you're doing, you just check it off. Oh, you did one. Good job. You got one token. You can even put stickers on here if you want to, or you can put stars, or if your child has a favorite character, you can put it on. Once they do what you want, you check it off, and then I usually remind them. I'll say, how many do we have left? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then puzzle. Especially for those kids that are really struggling to pay attention, I'll always count. Every time I do one, oh, we just did another one. How many left? 1, 2, 3, and then, and I usually point and I'll let them say puzzle. Okay, 3 more, then puzzle, and then I'll keep going with the activity. As you go along, you give the child a token, whether it be a star or a picture of their favorite princess, a picture of their favorite superhero, whatever it is, or you can just draw a little check mark in a box. So as soon as they do what you want them to do, then you give them a token. And as you go along and you've gained more compliance from the student, you can spread out the amount of time between each token. So I usually start my sessions by giving tokens for one response. And as I see that the student is being more compliant and doing more of what I'm asking, I'll maybe give a token every 5 answers or every 10 answers. It just depends on how the student is responding. If the student's having a really hard time with behavior and I'm really not getting a lot out of the student, then I will give tokens more frequently. Every 2 times they respond, every 1 time they respond, every 3 times they respond. It really just depends on how the student is responding to you, and that will determine how often you give tokens. You can also give tokens based on amount of time. So every 1 minute they get a token, or every 10 seconds they get a token. That just depends on the student's behavior plan. I suggest you reach out to the BCBA in your district in order to determine if there's a specific protocol that you should be using with token boards or with any kind of behavior management. The tips I'm giving you are just things that I've noticed work with students on the autism spectrum or students with special needs. So if you have specific questions, reach out to your BCBA. Once the student has earned all 5 tokens, or however many tokens you've written on a piece of paper, then you can give them whatever they've worked for. Look, you've earned all 5 tokens, now you get bubbles, or now you get iPad. And that's a really good way to get your student to comply with the activity because they know they're earning something fun at the end. If you notice that a student really isn't doing well with a token board, another way that you can try to get them to comply is by giving immediate reinforcement. And this usually occurs when you're giving them something that disappears immediately. So things like chips, candy, any kind of food items. I usually give a tiny little piece or like a thumb-sized amount to the student after they've done something that I've asked them to do. You can also use bubbles because bubbles disappear. You don't want to use anything that the child can still hold on to afterwards because then you're going to be in the battle of trying to get it back from them. So that's why we suggest using edibles or using bubbles. So you would do the same thing that you do with the token board. As soon as they respond to you, you give them a piece. And then as they keep responding and they keep complying with you, then you fade away the amount of times that you're giving that reinforcement. So you might give it, oh, you said A, good job. Oh, you said A, good job. Oh, you said B, good job. Okay, and now you want them to say B and C. Oh, you said B and you said C. Okay, here you go. So now instead of giving the reinforcement after 1 answer, you're giving it after 2 answers or 3 answers or 4 answers. It just depends on the student. So the more the student is complying, the longer you can space out the amount of reinforcement. Tip number 3, how long are you trying to make your student work? A lot of parents have said to me, oh, you do 30-minute sessions at school, so we're trying to do 30-minute sessions at home. And I understand that, but when you're trying to transition a student from learning from me or another teacher to learning from mom or dad, everything is going to be different. You're going to get increase in behavior. So I highly suggest that you decrease the amount of time that you're making your student do an activity. So I would recommend maybe starting with 1 minute and then building up from there. The activity could be as simple as open the Chromebook, go to the activity, do the first question, close the activity or the Chromebook, and be done. And you can use immediate reinforcement for that. You can use a token board, which is delayed reinforcement. So you can increase the length of time as you see your students complying with what you're asking them to do. If they're really struggling, I would decrease the amount of time that you're requiring them to do an activity. If you see that they're doing very well and they're complying with you, then I would increase the amount of time the next time you do that activity or the next time you do another activity. And eventually you'll get to the 30-minute mark, but I wouldn't put so much pressure on yourself or the student to do that much work when there's so many other factors playing a role right now and there's so much change going on. It's really unfair to you and your student to make them do that much work. And wouldn't you say that it would be better to get a little bit of response than fighting them for a half an hour and maybe get the same amount of work done anyway? So I'd rather them be compliant and get a little bit of work done and actually have them learn something than having you force to try to get them to do an activity, if that makes sense. Tip number 4, how engaging is the activity you've chosen for that student? I know for me personally, I've given a lot of parents options as far as what you can do for therapy. And that's because students on the autism spectrum and students with special needs have differing sensory preferences and sensory aversions. And what I mean by this is that kids with autism, their sensory system is a little bit different than ours. So they like certain senses and they hate other senses, or they're aversive to other senses. So you have the sense of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. I'm going to read off of my computer screen so I don't miss anything, so just bear with me that I'm not looking you right in the eye. So a kid who's sensory seeking that loves sight are kids that seek things like lights, spinning objects, colors. They love watching certain parts of videos over and over again. This is the kid who likes to throw things and watch them fall. So that's your sight sensory seeking child. Then you have your sound sensory seeking child. Those are the kids that seek sounds. They pause videos, they slow them down, they speed them up so they can hear the sound. They replay certain parts of a song or a show over and over again, and they absolutely love music. Then you have the kid who's in love with smell. So they love smelling things. Sometimes they'll smell people's hair, or they'll come up to you and smell your shirt. These kids have a heightened sense of smell, and they can make things out like detergent and softener that you use in your laundry. They really crave that sensory input. Then you have the kid who is sensory seeking for taste. So these are the kids that put everything in their mouth. This is the kid who chews on everything, even if it's not edible. They chew on toys and clothing. And some kids develop pica, which is like where they put inedible objects in their mouth, but that's a different diagnosis. Things like dirt, sand, because they crave that salty taste. Then you have the kids that love to touch everything. They love to play with things that can be manipulated. They like all different kinds of textures like Play-Doh and sand and slime. They like sandpaper books and materials where they can pull off the pieces and match, like the Velcro books. So then you have your vestibular sensory seeking kid. And the vestibular system is in the inner ear, and it controls balance. And these are the kids that like to be squeezed. They like to be held tightly. They crash themselves into walls and pillows and beds. They might be the kid that runs around constantly and can't sit still. These are the kids that like to swing and spin and jump. So all of those sensory seeking senses from your child, you want to focus on what they love sensory-wise and incorporate those things into the activities that you're doing. So when I provide you with multiple ways to do an activity, it's because some kids like certain things and some kids don't. And so if you want to get your student more involved in an activity, if they're a touch-seeking kid, give them manipulatives. If they're a sound-seeking kid, give them videos or music, incorporate that into their lesson. If they're a sight-seeking kid, incorporate lights or anything like videos into your activity. So as much as you can incorporate these senses into the activity that you're doing, you're going to see more compliance from your student. Now we have sensory aversive kids. These are the kids that dislike certain senses. For sight, they might avoid lights, they might avoid colors, they might cover their eyes if it's too bright in a room. For sound aversive kids, these are the kids that cover their ears. They hate loud sounds. They don't like busy rooms with a lot of things going on and a lot of noise. They really can't focus on what's going on if there's a lot going on around them. They might get upset when it gets loud, so they might scream or cry and you have no idea why. For smell aversive kids, these are the kids that really hate strong odors. They don't like when there's strong scents going on around them. For taste aversive kids, these are your picky eaters. So they don't like certain textures, they don't like certain tastes, and they're going to avoid a lot of different foods. And a lot of times they don't like trying new foods. And they might have a few foods that they like and the rest they don't. For touch aversive kids, these are the kids that won't touch certain things with certain textures, certain foods, certain toys, and they might not like being touched by other people. For your kids who don't like vestibular input, there's vestibular aversive. This is the type of kid who gets really nervous when they have to do like motor movements like swinging, spinning, any gross motor like climbing stairs. They get really like apprehensive to do those things. Then you have the kid that's proprioceptive aversive. The proprioceptive system refers to components of muscles, joints, and tendons that provide a person with subconscious awareness of body position. This is the kid who has difficulty sitting in a chair or holding a pencil. So those kinds of things might be difficult for that student. When children's sensory systems are out of whack, it causes them to communicate using maladaptive behaviors. Sometimes that's displayed as aggression, sometimes elopement, so they'll leave an area, sometimes grounding, which means they fall to the floor, or environmental destruction, where they're destroying personal property. You may also see what we call self-stimulatory or stimming behavior, or a stim, and this is usually related to sensory needs not being met, and the child is attempting to balance out his or her sensory system. So you might see something like a child spinning objects that aren't meant to be spun, or they're hyper-focused on repeating spinning of an object like wheels of cars, or spinning objects and staring at them. They might hyper-focus on something such as light that's spinning around, or the reflection on the floor, or they might like looking at themselves in the mirror, or making the same movement over and over again. They might hum or make the same sound repeatedly. They might rock their bodies, they might flap an object or their hands, they might throw objects to watch them fall, or they might spin their bodies over and over again. So all of these things are the kids' stimming behaviors and them trying to balance out their sensory system so that they feel more calm. Another great tip for kids with autism or kids with special needs who are really struggling to follow directions at home and comply with what you're asking is to use a visual timer. And a visual timer is great because it helps the student understand time concepts, which is usually a really hard skill for them to understand. It basically shows the time disappearing, and that helps them visualize how much time they have left to work before they earn something, or it shows how much time they have left before the preferred activity is finished. If you see this on the iPad or any Apple product, there's a visual timer going around the time. That orange bar is demonstrating how much time is left before the student has to be done. So this is a great way to show the student how much time is left visually, and there's a lot of apps that do this too. This one is called Countdown Timer, and it has a little duck on the logo, and basically it does the same concept. The color disappears and also fades from green to yellow to brown to red as the time goes by, which is really cool. And then whatever item appears in the center, which you can't choose unfortunately, but whatever item appears in the center is what sound is going to happen at the end when all the color disappears. I've also used the Time Timer app and this other one called Visual Timer. Those are two other great ones to use. So just look in the App Store. I'm sorry, I'm not an Android person, so I know more about Apple products than Android, but if you just type in Visual Timer, I'm sure you'll find something for free. And my last tip is try using a visual schedule. So a visual schedule basically shows pictures of what the student is going to do, and you can either use it for a specific activity. So first we're going to cut, then we're going to paste, then we're going to say, then we're going to color. Or you can use it for an entire day or half a day. So it basically shows the student what they're going to do, and that helps alleviate a lot of the changes that are happening and helps them understand what's coming up in the day. Because a lot of times they just don't understand if you tell them, oh, we're going to eat breakfast and then we're going to go see grandma, and then after that you have to go to the store to get some groceries. Like, they just don't understand that verbal input. But what students on the spectrum really understand is picture or visual input. So any chance you get to give them visual input will help them understand the verbal output that you're giving them, or the language that you're giving them. So it's a good way to supplement that language. A good app for that is the one called ChoiceWorks. This is also another good one, the First Then Visual Schedule. Another app I really like is ASD Tools, and it gives you a timer, token board and a first then board, and it gives you sequences, so that's pretty cool. So you can put pictures in there and have the child have to do a set of sequences, which is pretty cool. You have a first then board built right in. You have a token board built right in. So you drag the tokens up here. You can put whatever picture you want here that they're working for. And you have a visual timer. So it's like 4 apps in one, which is pretty cool. This is another visual schedule you can get. I get my schedules at school, and you can make different schedules for different activities, so that's really awesome. And that one is $4.99. This is another one, ChoiceWorks Calendar, and this one's really cool because you can set it weekly or monthly, so the child can see things across a week or a month, which is awesome. And then you can, this is the weekly one. So if you're doing certain activities after school, or you have like art or gym a certain day, you can put it in there. So that's really awesome. And that one is $4.99. This one is more expensive. It's $15, and it's called First Then Visual Schedule. So it kind of looks like that. Then you can use a First Then board. You can have things checked off. You can slide things into an envelope, so it's pretty cool. Very customizable. One of the tips that I recommend to parents when they're having a child who has significant issues with change is to make slight little changes throughout your day that really aren't that big of a deal, but eventually you can make those changes bigger and turn them into something from, oh, we're gonna wear your sneakers instead of your boots, or we're gonna drive a different way to get to school, or we're gonna drive a different way to get to the doctor's office, or maybe we're gonna take a walk, but we're not gonna go our normal path. So those tiny little changes in schedule will help the student overcome larger changes later on. So when you say, we can't do such and such today because of blah, 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 that will make them a lot more accepting of that bigger change in schedule than if you were to not provide all the tiny little changes throughout the day. So kids with autism are very rigid and they're very schedule oriented, but if you keep them schedule oriented, as soon as a change happens, they're going to have a really hard time with it. So the more you can throw in those little changes throughout your day, the more likely they will be accepting of larger changes later on. So just keep that in mind. Visual schedules are great, and if you have to make a slight change, they'll be a lot more accepting. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I tried to give you some tips that we use at school that really help the students be able to comply with what we're asking them to do, and also help them understand the language that we're giving them. A lot of the problem is they don't understand what's going on, and so giving them visual schedules and timers and token boards and all of these things will help them understand what you want them to do, and will help them understand when they're going to get what they want. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments section below, and I'd be happy to answer. You can also email me, or you can message me on Parent Square.